And can you leave this? You might? Okay.
I pledge allegiance to
The flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, sir. Roll call.
Mark Serbrook,
present.
Craig Scott, Charles Wiltie,
Here.
Roger Mayhew,
Yes.
Jenny David.
Yes, here. Any additions or corrections, commissioners? Any additions?
Tim, do we need any additions for the broadband for that?
It's all.
Were we able to get that last one on there? I'm good.
Thank you. Public comment. Any public comment in the room? Is this on an agenda item? Is this something on our agenda? Okay, there'll be another one later on. Any public comment on the phone? Appointments, Nathan Miller, Stevenson and Company, fiscal year 2024 annual audit. Come on up, sir. Nice to see you.
Right, so I've once again prepared a PowerPoint presentation and printed it off for you guys. The audit report, I believe I just sent a draft to Tim. It's been through all of our review process. Now it just has to go through clerical. So you don't have the bound physical copies, but the draft you have is going to be the same as the final bound copy. So, but for today, I just want to go through the PowerPoint, kind of an easier layout, just as I did last time. I think all of you have sat through at least one of our presentations, so it should be pretty familiar with how it kind of goes. So the second slide there, first thing I really want to focus on is the audit opinion letter. So the whole reason we do this audit is to provide an opinion on whether or not this big financial statement can be relied upon within material constraints. So we were able to provide the highest level of assurance we can, and that's called an unmodified opinion. And that's to say, these do not need to be modified. They are correct within reason. We don't test every single transaction. That would be crazy, but we do test based on risk and sampling and materiality. So we were able to give the highest level of assurance we can give there. So that's great. After that letter in the actual physical report, you'll find what's called management's discussion and analysis. That starts on page 3. And this is kind of that summary level of everything. So if you are limited on time, I encourage you to at least look at that section. After that is our first set of financial statements, which will go on to slide 3 there. That begins on page 12. So if you remember in the past, me talking about how there's 2 sets of financial statements for the county. There's your normal fund financial statements that you deal with on a meeting by meeting basis. And then there's these, what are referred to as government-wide financial statements, which are essentially all of your funds mashed together and add in long-term activity. So fixed assets, if you had any debt, our favorite net pension liability and net OPEB liabilities, those are all included in these government-wide financial statements. Just some numbers from those. The primary government, for that pension liability I mentioned, the primary government has a net pension liability at the end of the year of almost 8.4 million. The OPEB liability is 476,000. And then our component units also have both, which I believe that's mainly, probably only the road commission actually. The road commission is considered a component unit, so you'll see there the 3.75 million in net pension liability, and for the OPEB side, they have 142,000. For the ending net position of the primary government, we ended at 15,244,044, and that was an increase of almost 5 million from the previous year. Pretty similar increase as we had in the previous year. For the component units, you see it's a pretty big number, but again, road commission is in that, and that's a pretty big chunk. Over 39 million of the net position, which was actually a slight decrease overall. I also have a note there that many governments are actually in the red because of those pension liabilities and OPEB liabilities. So it's great that you're not in that situation. The next few slides are kind of for your reference. I don't necessarily want to go through line by line, but I'm highlighting some of the big changes. I talk about fixed asset additions. A few of them I want to point out, settlement receivables, those are obviously still coming in. We're still sort of getting those finalized numbers. Once we have those finalized numbers, then we can recognize the receivables. Of course, our unearned revenue went down, but that's just our recognition of the ARPA money. So we recognize 587,000 in the current year. Fixed asset additions, various ones. The biggest were with the transit. We had the pole barn, 400,000, and then a bus for 150,000 approximately. Revenue changes. Again, opioids, a big dollar amount, so that's there. It actually went down for the amount we recognized in the current year from the previous. But again, it's completely based on when those settlements come in and when they're finalized. Capital grants went up, and that's completely related to the pole barn. Now, the pole barn, you see, in the additions was 400,000. Well, the grant only covered about 235,000 of that, so that's why the grants didn't go up as much as the addition. Housing operating grants went up. Big chunk of that is that new My Hope grant. And also back to the transit, the operating grants went down. If you might not be aware, but the federal reimbursement for the transit was up at 36%, basically from COVID until now. Now it's back to the normal 18. So cut it in half, basically. Property taxes are up mostly from values, offset by transit millage rate went down. And interest is up, as we all probably know in our personal lives even. Expense wise, our payroll did go down somewhat, but our net pension related expenses increased, so it's kind of offset there. I mentioned the My Hope program is new, and our ARPA expenses for the audit year were lower. Of course, this coming year, they're gonna be quite a bit higher, as you know, with all the bids we've approved recently. Focusing in on component units, the road commission decreased overall net position by almost 200,000. I'm not gonna read all the percentages to you, more for your reference there. Drains went down by almost 20,000. EDC had an increase of about 51,000, and land bank had an increase of almost 19,000. So after those government-wide financial statements is where the fund financial statements start, and that's on page 15 of the, eventually you'll have a bound report. Major funds this year were the same as last year for governmental, general, housing, ARPA, and the opioid. And all that means when we say major fund versus all the other, major funds are significant enough where we have to test them on an individual basis. The rest of them can be aggregated and tested together. So that's all that is saying. You'll also notice on the statements themselves, in the front here, major funds have their own column. There's a column for other that is just all of them put together, but in the back, we have statements that break out all those other funds and bring them to the front, so. Fund balances, general fund ended at $628,083, which is a lot different than we've been having in the past few years. We're finally kind of in the positive for now. Of that, some of it's non-spendable. We have prepaid items that make up some of that fund balance. We can't spend that money. There's 9,139 assigned to the posse currently. And the remaining is unassigned fund balance. at 590, almost 596,000. I put the percentages there, but of course, we're still in that process of building our fund balance back up. But those percentages give you an idea of where you're at. The recommended percentage of unassigned fund balance to current year expenditures is in the 15 to 20% range. So essentially, you can get by for 3 months if revenues dried up. Of course, we're not there. We're working toward that. Hopefully, one of these years soon, we can see something in that range, but that's so you can see kind of where we're at. The increase for the general fund was 586,564 over the prior year. Housing program ended at 41,000 approximately. All of that's restricted for housing activities. There was a decrease of 67,263 there. And with the housing, a lot of it is dependent on timing. So there's revenues out there that weren't received within 60 days. So there was a pretty good decrease in that fund balance, but the timing was a big part of it. ARPA ended at 155,967, and that is all assigned because that is essentially the interest that you've earned in that fund, less your bank fees, so pretty much the interest. That's an increase of 89,911. Again, that's current year interest, less our bank fees. And the way that the ARPA fund works, just so everybody has a clear view of how that is, that money all kind of came in ahead of time in pieces, I think 2 pieces at least. So that money isn't considered a revenue until the expenses are incurred. So that's why there's no fund balance that's not interest. There's money in the fund, in the cash, but then it's sitting in a liability to say, you haven't earned this revenue yet, so we call it unearned revenue. Once you have the expenses incurred, then a matching revenue is recorded, taken out of the liability, put to the revenue. So you have a balancing to zero essentially every year. The opioid fund had an ending fund balance of 1,083,638, an increase of 625,545. And the other non-major governmentals had a total of 1.75 million, an increase of 518,451. A big chunk of that is restricted. Some of it's committed, and there's $47 sitting in the old COVID, the other COVID fund, not ARPA. I forget what it's called actually, but I think it's like outstanding interest from the past. The COVID emergency. Yes.
The opioid money, is that going to be handled the same way as the ARPA money?
It is not the same as the ARPA.
So it is booked as revenue?
It is booked as revenue once the settlement is final for that. It's just then restricted on how you can use it.
It's not booked until its settlement is.
Once the settlement is official, that's when we're booking it as the revenue.
Okay.
And then of course a receivable until they pay it to you.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's quite a bit different. The state gave all the money up front and said, well, it's not actually revenue until you spend it, because if you didn't spend it, they were gonna take it back. The opioid settlement, here's your money. You are required to spend it on
Well,
these
the ARPA
things.
money we didn't get from the state, we got from the federal government.
Oh, sure. I misspoke on that.
Yeah.
But yes, the money came in and they could have taken it back had you not spent it.
Right. Can I back up just a little bit
Yes.
there to that unassigned? Unassigned, that's our fund balance.
Essentially, yes.
And for us, that'd be about 3%.
5.7% of your
It
current
is
year.
really.
Yeah, sorry,
5.7.
that's such a small
So
font
right
there.
underneath, that's real small.
Yeah, I see it there, but I mean, our total budget's much higher than 1 million. I would have thought that, you know,
Well, it'd be 10.
at 1 million, it would be 5.9%.
No, it'd be
Wouldn't it?
59 at a million.
59%?
of a million. So
Oh,
of 10 million,
no, I
five,
mean,
yeah,
10, our budget is more than 10 million. That's what I'm saying.
right. And I'm basing it on the expenditures, which were 10 million something.
Okay,
Yeah,
the
not
expenditures.
necessarily the
All right.
next year's budget. Yep.
okay, all right then,
So yeah, it's probably, compared to your budget, it's probably a little lower in the 4% range.
5.7, okay. Right, right, and the total budget numbers.
Right.
And isn't that what we're really judged on, is the total budget numbers rather than expenditures? As far as a fund balance, an actual fund balance?
Well, no, I think it would be what you actually expended. A budget can be
Well, I'm
whatever.
6 months into this next year now,
Sure.
do I have closer to 5.7% of my budget in a fund balance, or do I have more like 4.5?
Right, and it's hard to hit a moving target. So if you move 6 months in advance, then you might also have had a bunch of different revenues. So at a point in time.
Well, you know,
at
I have a bunch of new revenue.
Right, at a point in time in September 30th, it was 5.7.
Okay,
And until it all flushes out between when you receive your revenues, when you
But
get your
next-
expenses, it's impossible to really get
till
a
next year
number.
when you come back.
Right,
Okay,
but this gives you an idea of about where you're at to start the year, and if you stay on budget, then you will likely be in that similar range. Hopefully, your budget is to save even more money, which would be great.
Okay.
Any other things, Craig?
not yet,
Okay. Feel free to stop me whenever. for
I
sure.
will.
Mhm. Okay, the next one, I want to focus on the general fund. Because it is a little confusing. We especially had confusion when the fund balance was lower. But the general fund, as we talk about it in these statements, includes three funds. It's the general fund, our 101 we're used to, the law library fund, which is the 269 fund, and our soldiers and sailors relief fund, which is 293. So back when, it was probably 2017-ish, GASB 54 required, based on the behavior of those funds, they should be part of the general fund. So I broke out what the cash balance was at year end, so cash and cash equivalents, which was in the general fund, 362,033. And when I say in the general fund, I'm talking on these financial statements. So then broke out between those three, general fund was 189,031, law library 14,115, soldiers and sailors 158,887. Now I know Karen also passed out something that shows about 128,
Mhm.
but I want to emphasize, I believe that's probably just the common cash, correct? So she's focusing on the common cash. I'm talking all cash in the general fund put together. So that's why that 189 is higher than the 128. But I also want to point out, like, yes, it's great. We finally don't have to be borrowing from another fund at the year end and do that silly entry where we're saying we have cash that we really don't, and we flip it back. We didn't have to do that this year.
We don't have to fib.
You don't have to, in Craig's words, you don't have to do that. No, but the state does require you can't show a negative. But this year we didn't have to do that, which is great. But I just want to make sure you guys are obviously very aware of the fiscal situation. We've had to make some tough decisions. The ARPA is going away. We're using it up. Just, that's a reminder that it's, the reason we got out of that problem was mostly that ARPA money, that $500,000 each year helped us climb out of that hole. Now, absolutely, all these cuts are gonna help that. And any further tough decisions you have to make will help that, but the ARPA is drying up, especially after all these projects we've committed to. There's really not gonna be much left there. So just be aware of it. It's not
Will that be interest earned then? What would be left?
for the ARPA.
Yeah.
The interest that's earned in the ARPA, as far as I understand it, Tim, correct me if you have a different understanding, is that can be used as well.
That becomes our money.
Right, I think with the question you're asking, with the projects we approved, the intent was to run that down to zero. In terms of the 4+ million that was entered, and that's accurate, yes.
Okay.
Unless these projects come in way under budget.
Way under. and we'll be in a hurry, to
Would be a surprise.
spend it. Boy, that'd be tough.
So similarly to the cash, the fund balance ended at 628,083. Well, that's broken up into the general fund 101 was 456,056. The law library, the 269 fund was 14,155, and the soldiers and sailors ended at 157,912. So when you see the number on this financial statement, just remember it is kind of broke up into three different pieces.
Well, you got a moving target, don't you? Now it's 456.
The fund balance is.
Yes,
Yeah,
the page before it's 596.
that's unassigned fund balance with all three.
Okay, it's a moving target.
It's just confusing. I wouldn't say it's a moving target. It's definitely,
You just did a few minutes ago.
no, I was saying if you try to measure percentages at a
Okay,
different point in the year,
okay, but
the date moving is.
we
the
need to
moving target.
relate this to the general public, and we want to be somewhat accurate,
Okay,
okay?
So
I don't, you know,
456 would be the accurate figure, true
the
general fund.
101
It's available,
general fund balance.
right?
So then that. Let's go back to that fund balance. The non-spendable and the assigned would be in that 101. So 456. Less the 22,969 and less than 9,139. That's. 32,000 less than 456. So in the 422 neighborhood of unassigned 101.
Thank you.
now we're down there 3.8%.
Well, but your expenses, keep in mind, also include those other funds,
Okay.
the law library and sailors, so you'd have to pull those out of that denominator. So then the next slide is just fund balance over the past 3 years. You can see how it's changed. Of course, the general fund has been pretty darn close to zero, as you know. This year it finally has a bar that you can see. Housing Commission, again, you can see the dip in the current year. And that fund is very dependent on timing of when those revenues come in, that grant money. ARPA fund has had slight building, and that's again, just interest. And opioid it's only the second year of the fund. And it's built up quite a bit based on the settlements that are finalized. Other governmental funds, you can see there's a decent jump in this current year as well. The three main funds driving that increase were road patrol increased about 147,000. Indigent defense increased about 168,000, and probate childcare increased about 152,000. And then I have the slide in there where we've talked about transfers in the past to make sure we're not doing too much out of the delinquent tax funds. And you'll see in the writing in the black there, the average growth in those delinquent tax revolving funds since 2015 is around 420,000. So if you were to transfer more than that, then you would be depleting those. And there are years where we were doing that. So if you look at like 2021, we had to transfer 750,969 from the tax umbrella fund. That's way more than the 420. So we were depleting it then. Now you can see the progress especially in that tax umbrella line, where we're intentionally dwindling that down to where we don't have to transfer from it anymore. So like for the current year, really the 91,500 is the only one coming out of those delinquent tax revolving funds. We still have the 110 from the tax reversion. But the 91 is a great bit of progress from that 750,000 3 or 4 years ago. Ending that position for the business type or enterprise funds We have our public transit at 1,986,261. That was an increase of 329,328. Of that, 1,986,673,955 is tied up in our fixed assets, so it's the value of those assets, the book value after being depreciated. Leaving unrestricted net position of basically 1.3 million for the transit. Tax umbrella ended at 6,163,790, which is an increase of 38,469. And then, of course, we have our new 2023 delinquent tax revolving, ended at 137,468. And our other non-major enterprise funds had net position of about 2.5 million, an increase of almost a half a million. Of that, there's 130,570 in assets. So that's your funds. I think mainly the park is what has the assets in those non-major enterprise funds. So the unrestricted, there's 2,373,000. Then we have our 3-year look back of those funds. Tax umbrella, really, you can see some fluctuation there, but it did increase in the current year. The thing with the tax umbrella also is that every year we're closing an old delinquent tax revolving fund into it, so it's hard to necessarily see what the full effect is, other than we're not depleting our total delinquent tax revolving funds when you consider the umbrella and those 3 or 4 recent years. In transit, you can see a positive direction there. Of course, that's very dependent on their property taxes and their grant revenue moving forward, but a good pattern here at least. So back to general fund, and we can look at revenue and expenses. So this is again 3-year comparisons, the dark blue being current year's things, and the pink magenta prior year, and green 2 years ago. So you can see revenue and other financing sources, so basically our transfers in. This year, we had over 12 million in the general fund, and our expenses and transfers out were at less than 11.5 million. So that's where our 500, whatever that increase was, 500 some thousand comes in. And you can see in the prior year, it was almost even. And the year before that, the expenses actually outweighed the revenues. So that's a great switch to see happening. The revenues themselves over the past 3 years by different types. Across the board, nothing too crazy. Charges for services, you can see kind of had a drop this year. And a big chunk of that is related to the diverted felons was down 110,000. And our out-of-county inmate charge for service is down 65,000. So that's a big piece of that. The only other one that really jumps out is probably your property taxes, but values have been going up for the past few years there. Pie chart below that, just to give you an idea of where your concentration of revenues are. You can see property taxes are pretty important here, 62% almost. And then follow that with our state grants at 13 and our charges for services at 11. But yeah, just a reminder that property taxes really drive the county for sure. Expense wise, same concept, looking at it by sort of more of a departmental but group look. So general government, judicial, public safety, public works, so on. Really, you can see across the board for the most part, at least those first 3 bigger categories, a little bit of a drop this year. We made some cuts, and there were certain things in the public safety. It looks like the biggest drop, a lot of that was wages. But there was also $65,000 vehicle last year that was expensed in that department that this year wasn't, so. Judicial is mostly wages, and the general government saw a small decrease, basically, wage related as well. A pie chart, same concept, kind of look at where your expenses are concentrated, and you can see public safety is your biggest slice at 33%, general government at 29%, and then judicial at 14.5%, and health and welfare at almost 11%. Then doing the same 3-year split with expenditures, but with different categories, so more on what the type of expense it is, not where it is. So payroll and the related expenses, purchase services, supplies, and so on. And you can see the payroll did go down from the previous year. There's definitely a drop there. Other than that, repairs, maintenance, capital outlay, utilities, that's gonna fluctuate year to year. We know we're gonna have a ton of capital outlay this coming year in using up that ARPA money, so you'll see that jump next year, I'm sure. But the breakdown for that on the pie chart, see payroll is over 60% of your costs. So when you're making negotiations and payroll decisions, they really do have a big impact on your financial standing. It's 60% of your costs, so. And that was the same, it was in the low 60% last year as well. And then I have a slide that we've had in there before for probate childcare, just to see how that's doing over time. It's slightly confusing, but the first is expenditures and the next two are basically the revenue and then what the general fund is giving. So the green is what the general fund is giving and the magenta is the state and other reimbursement revenues. You can see this year, just looking, if you added the second two numbers up, you're well over that expenditure amount. So I don't know as far as the requirements for what the general fund has to transfer. Or if it's just, this is what we budget at the start. But probate, at least this year, is starting to build some fund balance, so I don't know what that consideration is, and I don't know what the state mandates, so I don't wanna say that's too much, cause maybe that's exactly what's required. But just know that the probate is, what did it end at? Let me pull that up. It's building a fund balance for sure, which is not necessarily bad. They obviously, the nature of that fund is unpredictable. You don't know what you're gonna be required to pay out with state mandates. So it's probably not bad to have some fund balance. But in the current year, the increase was 152,444. And now the fund balance at year end was 479,042. The argument could be made, do we need to have a fund balance in the probate at all if the general fund's supporting it anyway? But that's just something to think about, keep in mind. I don't know the right answer and what the state mandates are. But it just jumps out to me that we're transferring 338,000 to give them a net income of 152. So. After the probate, I have our slide on the jail and revenue expense analysis. Now, I know obviously we had to make that decision to sort of shut down the jail, but it's still useful information to remind you of where we were at. If you can see, I have little, I'm sorry, I do apologize, it's so small, but you can see where the year is. And then PCPD is prisoner cost per day. So in the current year, that was at 86.25. The previous 57.15. Go to the year previous 63.25. So this year's a little higher. Probably a combination of things. I know with it closing, there was some very late end of the year, lower number of inmates. But I also suspect that there's potentially some extra overtime if there's cuts and what have you, but this year was definitely higher. Either way, across the board for the past 5 years, you look at those numbers and we're in the 60+ range every year. When we were having out of county inmates, we weren't charging them anywhere near that, so the math doesn't work for that. If you're not charging what it costs you to have those inmates, so
You should say that twice.
that's informational there for you on the slide, so. You can take that home and look at it at night, right?
Put it on your.
Yeah, put it under your pillow. So back to the financials. After our fund financial statements, we have the notes to the financial statements. The boring part, if you will. But it really is important and it supports all of the numbers in the financial statements, different disclosures about policies, tying out of balances, things of that nature. Some of that is self-explanatory, but there are a couple notes I want to highlight. The first being contingencies and commitments on page 62. We do have pending litigation here at the county, as we often do with the nature of the county, and there's unknown outcomes with those. The board also committed to purchase a van from Hoekstra for the transit, and then also pave a paving project at the transit as well. So that's a commitment because the board decided or approved that before September 30th. The next category is subsequent events, which you'll find in a note on page 65. This is things that were approved after September 30th that haven't, or yes, after September 30th, that are significant. So of course, with our ARPA projects, I put the most significant ones in the footnote. The requirement, if it's material, put it in there. So there are other projects I want you to, obviously you know about as you approve them, but there are other projects out there, but I highlighted the window replacement, the energy efficient lighting, the ADA restrooms, and the boiler project are the biggest ones that are out there. Another note I want to highlight is our prior period adjustment note. There were 4 prior period adjustments this year. The first one is one that we have pretty much every year because of the transit and the nature of those reimbursement grants. They basically have a pool of money. Then they get paid a certain amount and our audit calculates, okay, here's what it should have been. And then when it gets to the end, if there's no money in the pool, they don't get what we said they should have. So we have a receivable to say they should have received X. Well, that big pool only had just less than that, so they don't quite get it. Well, that receivable would stay out there forever if we didn't do a prior period adjustment. So it's really based on state funding. They try to get as close as possible to what our audited numbers are, but it all depends on the availability of funds on the state level. So once those projects are officially closed out by the state, we know whether or not they're going to receive that money. Or because sometimes it goes the other way too, where the state has an excess and they pay that out as well. Our second prior period adjustment, we had 2 new funds this year. We wanted to be able to track the Veterans Memorial. It says fund here, sorry for the typo. I'm sure it's fun, but it's fund. And the Veterans Peacetime Relief Fund. So those 2, we wanted to be able to track those revenues separately in these new funds. So that required us to do a prior period adjustment to get those numbers in there. And then of course we have our common closing out of our delinquent tax revolving fund. So we closed out the 2020 in the current year. And you'll see.
That's our last year.
Right.
We always, next year,
Yep.
we'll close.
So you'll have this,
21.
you'll have this pretty much every year.
Yeah.
And that transit one likely also. So you're gonna have a prior period adjustment on every time, but sometimes not as many. And then the last prior period adjustment was moving donations that were previously recorded in the Veterans Office. Later realized they should have been in the Soldiers and Sailors, which again, as a reminder, is lumped into the general fund on these financials. So those are the 4.
No, was there more prior period adjustments in the past, or this? Basically, the prior period ones were a low number.
Like last year was just the 2, the transit and the delinquent tax. But these other 2 are pretty much related to those new funds and thinking about our veterans donations, so. After the notes, we have required supplementary information, starts on page 67. And this is where you can see that historical, information on our pension liability and our OPEB liability. I think, I was hoping it would be easy to flip to, yeah. So it has 10 years for the pension, it has 10 years of information on what that liability was. And it also has our percentages, which I put in the slide here. The plan fiduciary net position as a percentage of total pension liability is a long way to say how much is the plan funded. 76%. So if it was 100%, you'd be a fully funded plan.
Nobody is.
No. So last year was 71%, this year it's 76, which is great, yay. But we had interest earnings this year and it could flip at any moment. You never know. But at least you're above that 60% where the state starts to hound you to say, why aren't we, what do we need to do? How much more do we need to contribute to get up to that? And then the OPEB, we also have the same thing. The OPEB's a little bit newer, so there's not quite 10 years yet. It looks like 7 years. Eventually there will be 10 for the OPEB as well. The OPEB we don't have funded right now. It's just out there, without money set aside for it. So that one was at 476,042. Compared to the pension liability of 8 million something, 8,393,000. It's quite a bit smaller. Next we have our budget comparisons. So for the general fund, I'm not gonna read the numbers to you, but I do want you to look at the variance percentage and see that our revenues were within 2%. That our expenses were within less than 1%. And I like to recommend that you stay within 5%, so that's great. What that tells me is that you're actually looking at your budget, using it as a management tool and not just putting a big number on the paper and saying, oh yeah, we meet it, because that's useless. You would never know if you got close to it, that you're overspending. So great job with that. And obviously it shows with building the general fund back up and these percentages. It's a huge tool to use and you guys are doing a great job with it.
Year over year, in your experience here, you've been doing this now 3 years?
3 years as the main, yep.
Do you see a year over year improvement there?
I would say since I've taken over, I've definitely not seen much improvement since then. Like it's been really good for 3 years as far as the management of it. Now, the availability of funds helps. It makes it look prettier.
Yeah, I get that, but I mean, year over year, has it been easier for you to do our audit?
There's always different challenges. I will say this year, yeah, compared to 3 or 4 years ago, especially, the challenges that are present are definitely better than the challenges that came with all the negative cash and fund
That's what I'm
balance.
asking.
Yep, for sure. I think within the past couple of years, especially knowing when
A lot of adjustments back then.
knowing when I get here that I don't have to worry about cash being in balance is it's a really big thing for an auditor to know that everything's at least in there. Whether it's in the right spot, that's a different story. But if I come and there's not a bank reconciliation that's accurate,
Okay.
I can't rely on a thing.
Mhm.
So that's huge. And I've definitely noticed that change. And also just, I don't know off the top of my head on these percentages, but I would be surprised if they were this small in the past. I think you guys have taken a concerted effort to make sure you're using that budget, and I think that shows. So,
Well, that's my question,
yeah,
because we manage the budget, and I'd like to know that if we're doing it correctly or not.
yeah, I think.
All of us feel that way.
I think that percentage is the biggest indicator, bigger than, oh, fund balance went up, because that's dependent on what you get for money and what expenses come in at. The fact that your budget is close to the actual tells me that you're using it throughout the year. You're actually considering it. And if things were different than your budget, it would raise a flag and you'd question. So. Yeah, I think there's definitely been improvements there. So after the required supplementary information, there's just what's called supplementary information. This is where I was talking about those non-major funds. They each get their own column here and get sent up to the front. But at least you can see them all separately there. Those are our combining fund statements. After that, we have fund level statements for our component units, other than the road commission, because that has a separate audit. But the drains, the EDC and the land bank all have their fund level statements back here. And then with the transit, we're required to do a few other schedules for MDOT, so you'll see those back there as well. Then, of course, this year we did do a single audit. Once again. The threshold to have to do a single audit is $750,000. The federal awards for the county this year were just under 2 million, so yes, we needed a single audit. And we have to have 40% coverage of that nearly 2 million. So we had to test two programs actually this year, because there's not a single program that was high enough to get us to that 40%. So we did the coronavirus relief local government grants program, which is basically known as ARPA, but that grant includes several other grants that are funded through ARPA. So in this year, we had the new My Hope grant through the housing and the new blight elimination program with Land Bank that were included in that testing. And then we also tested the bus and bus facility program, which is essentially 2 capital grants for buses at the transit. So those 2 were there. And of course, I skipped over the most important line, no compliance findings noted there. So that's great. Single audit was good. And then everybody's favorite part, the management letter. So at the back, when you actually get your bound report, it'll be loosely enclosed in the back of the bound report. And it has 2 appendices. The first talks about kind of some more canned accounting jargon stuff, but it's still important. Significant estimates we put in there, depreciation. The OPEB and net pension liabilities are big estimates. I want to stress that. They're big, scary numbers, and they're kind of hard to actually come up with. They're just guessing when people are going to die. They're guessing what interest rates are going to be. It's impossible to come to a completely accurate number. It'll never be that, but it's as best of an estimate as they can come up with. But it is an estimate, so just know that. Also on there, if we had difficulties during the audit, we could mention them. There were none. All journal entries were provided. There were no disagreements with management. Management provided their representation that they weren't withholding anything from us knowingly, which is good. There were no consultations with other accountants for different opinions. We gave the best opinion you can give, so there's no reason to really do that. And no other issues other than what's in Appendix 2. When we get to Appendix 2, this is where we can talk about recommendations, weaknesses, findings, compliance issues, if there were any. And the one that you're probably familiar with is financial statement preparation. I talk about this one each year. This one's considered a material weakness. But really, this is more of a disclosure to say you're contracting with us to prepare these financials. So if we didn't do it, if you didn't contract with us and we took your trial balance and plopped it in, there's a good chance it'd be materially misstated. So that's the disclosure to say, yes, you know, there's a risk that you might not catch something because you're relying on us to prepare it. And that's the one where I've mentioned in the past, when we submit the audit report, the state asks, are there any issues outside of financial statement preparation specifically? So it's a very common one. I don't think any of my local governments have this not in their report. A couple of my schools that have CPAs on staff don't have this, but I think all of my local governments have this same finding, so I don't even want to call it a finding, it's more of a disclosure. No significant deficiencies this year. Other comments, we still have the nature park cash receipts sitting out there. This is a repeat from last time. We're working on it. I believe that the cash boxes, when we were here for the audit, they had the cash box. It just wasn't in practice. I'm not sure if that's,
We're not open right now.
oh, well, that makes sense being in the winter. So that's something that moving forward, hopefully we can get the process nailed down and have those employees bring that box in. I think bi-weekly is probably a solid, at least weekly would be great, but of course, that's not always practical. Other comment, budgeted deficit fund balance. Now, this sounds scary, but it's really a simple matter of that revenue recognition and the ARPA that we talked about. So the final budget for the ARPA fund, when it was approved, it didn't have the revenues, so it had the expenditures. But not the federal revenues, which should match those expenditures, so. In a sense. We had them by approving the expenditures, but not it didn't get translated into the revenue, so. Unfortunately, that makes it show a deficit, so I have to have this compliance issue in here. But that's something to next year before the final budget, if you want to reach out to me and make sure, okay, does this look like what it should for the ARPA, that I would be more than happy to take a peek at it for you too. But that's all that was, is that revenue didn't get translated as a budgeted revenue. And probably because there's no extra money coming in, so conceptually, it's a weird concept for sure. And then the last one is another repeat of stuff we've had in the past, and this is the note to say that basically not all departments are using the time system for clocking in and clocking out, as we know. The sheriff and the jail chose not to, but we still want to have it in there to recommend that we think it would be beneficial for adequate tracking of payroll, so that's out there. I know we talked about hopefully in the future we can work toward that, but until then, that's still out there. Status of prior year comments. So as I mentioned, some of those were repeats. So financial statement preparation control, the payroll tracking controls, and the nature park, the total top row there are all repeats. Budget control was corrected, and that was essentially we had an issue where what was approved by you didn't quite make it into the software exactly that way. This year it appears to be more in line, so that is corrected. District Court, as you know, had the big audit last year. And they also were never really giving cash or bank reconciliations to the treasurer's office, so that was corrected in the current year. Last year, we did have a finding with the sheriff department fundraising, specifically with K9 t-shirt sales. That is still on my list of things to follow up on. Didn't make this year's simply because they didn't do any of those this year, so there's nothing to test. But I do have it on my list. That way, if next year we can figure out, okay, did you do t-shirt sales this year? Let's see if you took our recommendations into consideration.
Does that include any grants, or any private grants or private donations? Does that include that kind of thing?
The recommendation would be the same as far as wanting the collection process to run through the county. But the testing we did specifically was on that one fundraiser.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we had the tracking of the journal entries, just to give you guys an idea. I know a few years ago, it was, holy cow.
I
let's
guess
try to
that
be
was
better
my
with this.
question back a few minutes ago was what?
Yeah, very simple. So you can see, 3 years ago it was at 77. And then it dropped to 73 and then down to 57 last year, which is great. This year, you might think, oh crap, it went up 3. What are we doing different? Well, we had a bunch of new stuff this year. So really, I don't think 60 versus 57 is a lot higher, if at all. We had the those the two prior period adjustments, the two of them there, the new My Hope grant resulted in at least one, maybe two entries. And the new land bank grants I had to do an entry for, so I think we're right in the same neighborhood as last year, is what I'm getting at there.
Which is down from previous years.
Yes, well down from back in
What would
21
be,
there.
what is the best? What's the goal?
Yeah.
What's the goal there? I guess.
I think
Goal zero?
no, there's definitely entries that we would do that doesn't make sense. For the client to do. I think a good, awesome goal would be in probably the 30 range. But I also don't, again, are there a lot of those entries where the time benefit versus us having the work paper in front of us and doing it? I don't know that there's value in getting from 40 to 30. But I think, yeah, it's a good goal to have, would be 30. Definitely. And then I also threw in a new slide, because this is money that's kind of new coming out. Make sure you guys are aware of it. So marijuana revenue sharing is a thing that's been happening, at least on the medical side. Not for here, but for other entities, starting in, I think, 2018. The adult use started in about 21. And essentially, based on however many licenses you have in your local government, so in your county, the amount you get revenue sharing for is based on the licenses. So for instance, for the adult use marijuana, I believe this year there were, well, the year we audited, there was one license, so it was $59,000 per license for the adult use recreational. And then the one that you likely received in February was $232,000. Well, that's 4 licenses. So we jumped up in the county to having four entities that have licenses for recreational. And as a result, the county received 4 distributions. I think it was like 58,000 this year. And medical is very similar, but it's a totally different dollar amount you're dealing with. And I believe that's the licenses on that are more individual, because the license numbers were in the hundreds. So I'm guessing that must be individuals that have the licenses. But you can see in March, I don't know if that's been received yet or is going to be, but 33,766 for that in this current year. During the audit, it was for medical 5,800 and for recreational 59,000. And those revenue sharing dollars are unrestricted dollars, so they can be spent on any general fund, whatever the board decides is a good use for that. So that's more of an informational of things as they, especially if you get more, if there's more dispensaries or what have you that pop up, that number could even grow more. And those are out there on the website. You can see what those distributions are on the state website, so. Then, of course, I have my contact information there. And you guys can feel free to reach out to me after if you think of something after. But if you have something tonight, still feel free to.
Questions, comments? Commissioner Serbrook?
None.
Commissioner Mayhew?
If we took the opioid money out, how would we look
As far as,
as overall?
well, the opioid isn't in the general fund at least, so. I mean, really
Last
that,
year, you said you put it in there so it looked better.
no, I hear what you're saying. I think you're referring to when I was talking about the cash and how we moved the ARPA cash to the general fund temporarily and then moved it back.
Right, but you said you showed it just so it looked better. We couldn't spend it, but we have it.
So I'm not sure what you're referring to there.
Well, we still can't spend it, but we're showing that we have it.
So it is, yes, it definitely shows we have over $1 million in fund balance for opioid, but yes, you have to spend it on certain things that those settlements allow, which $1 million is, it's a lot of money to try to spend on that stuff, so.
The interest on that though is going into the general fund, correct? And that can be spent, it's
I-
not,
the opioid interest income is being credited to the opioid special fund.
I do think, I was looking at it yesterday, actually, and everything, all the stuff I found was on the state level, but it was saying any interest they earn goes back into the opioid. And I saw, I think it was on the association, Michigan Association for Counties or whatever it's called there. There was something there that said the interest had to go back and be spent. Yeah. So I don't believe the interest on the opioid is the same as the ARPA.
Commissioner Scott.
Well, I've been asking right along, and I think I've been getting my answers. Number one is a fund balance. Number two is the overall year-over-year improvements.
Yeah.
Not only of our financial standing, but how it affects your audit also. I'm very interested to know that it's become maybe, I don't know, term is easier, smoother.
Definitely. I can confidently say that yes.
All right.
Smoother, easier, less stressful when I don't have to worry about the transfers or a
Right.
bank rec that's not working. That's,
And our processes are now have improved the way we do business, everything. This is big to me.
yeah, as it should be. I think it shows that you guys care. You guys have definitely put all the work in.
We've been listening to you and others and been
Yep.
making these improvements. And the result of that is the county runs smoother, the audit runs smoother.
Yep.
And we're building a fund balance that we did not have.
Yeah, it was pretty dark for a while there, so.
Pretty dark. Well, it
I'm
was
glad-
getting darker all the time, wasn't it?
It for a while, and then,
Because when I think my first year here, the light at the end of the tunnel was gone the next year, it was the train. The light was the train coming, headed right toward us, and it wasn't daylight.
yeah, I definitely think. Obviously, ARPA helps get you here,
Well,
but it also, now that you're here, you have the ability to stay there. I think if you really stay on top of your budget and,
well, without ARPA, I think we would have had to make those big decisions 2 years, 3 years prior.
oh, sure, and there might have been bigger decisions.
I think it was just a good chance to
Mhm.
give us some breathing room and make some changes while we did it. They didn't look as drastic that way.
Right.
Okay.
Commissioner Wiltie.
I know Commissioner Scott had said something when we were in the beginning here, looking at fund balances. Just,
Mhm.
obviously, this is really important for us. I've only been here a few years, but it's really feels good to be able to go to our constituents and talk about a fund balance that has some meat behind it.
Positive number. yeah.
Right, so just, it's kind of confusing how all that works, but, so what is the number that we should use? I know 422,
Mhm.
I mean, we are a general fund of 628. And we've got unassigned 595. What is the number that we should all be?
I think the 422 is your best conservative number to use. Now, technically, that non-spendable, it's just not cash you can spend, but it is a prepaid expense. And actually what it was a double paid bill that you're going to be getting a credit for. So in a way, you could consider that a fund balance. It's just not something you can spend.
The 22,000.
The 22,969. The assigned is the posse stuff, and I know we've had talks about seeing what we could do, but that is the posse set aside piece, so that I wouldn't consider that. So conservatively, the 422, realistically, 444, 445 would be the money, the unassigned money in the 101 general fund.
So recommendations, like you said, typically county government 15% around
Yeah,
there.
15 to 20%.
Shows us, we obviously have made some good decisions and we're heading the right direction, but we've got a long ways to go.
Long way to go, yes, and part of my reminder on the ARPA being done. Obviously it helps when if you do the big projects. It doesn't help you on a bottom line thing, but it helps you not have to spend on those projects out of the general fund for the next, hopefully, while. So that hopefully will help your budgets in the next 5 to 10 years. But it's gonna take time to still get up to that 15 to 20 for sure.
Thank you.
My worrisome, which those numbers are fantastic. But looking at the transfer to general funds for the year 2024, $500,000 of ARPA's transferred from the commissary fund of $225,000.
Yeah,
You know, hopefully these tough decisions that have been made in the past year. Help us continue in that positive direction, which I believe that they will, but I
yes,
think that these transfers from general fund in 2024 really helped. With this budget, without these transfers next year, because that commissary is not gonna be that number next year neither. That $500,000 is gone next year.
right. So that's, well, and hopefully with the commissary not being there, you have some lowered expenses too, but
Correct.
the other side of it too is the transfers from the general fund were very similar. I wanted to pull that out. But that's where I was talking about that probate childcare fund. It's not just the probate childcare fund that the general fund is supporting, but not just supporting, building their fund balance.
You know, we probably, now that it's been, what, 3 years since the, across the street? We really need to take a look at the savings and maybe possibly decrease their budget. I understand the state reimbursement and all of that. Well, I don't understand, but I know there's a factor there, but obviously there's been quite a savings by looking at this slide that was presented with that building of what childcare has actually cost us, which is a great thing. That's our reasoning for doing it. But maybe we need to really look at that budget next year.
I think to answer your question about the offsetting of the transfers in is the year-over-year savings that we're getting on general fund expenses.
What one are you on? What page are you on?
Okay, page 10. General government, we went down in public safety, we went drastically down in from 23 to 24. That savings will be there again next year. When we saved, we were over 400,000 and we came down to 3,000,008. Or 4 million, we were over 4 million. We came down to 3.799, 3.8. So that there was about probably a $300,000 to $400,000 savings. That same savings will again be there in 24, in 25. Because that was that cut of those 5 and 8, there's 8 altogether. That was cut out of public safety, so, you know, 8 times 80,000, say. You know, just.
Make a big impact, correct?
Yeah, that's $640,000. And then that will, again, and then on top of that, the other layoff written up compensation reductions will then again, I think that's gonna totally offset your transfers in.
It'll be interesting to see,
Yeah.
but again, I think the
Sure.
childcare, that's a nice graph to see.
Well, and then I did pull up the indigent defense is the same exact thing. Actually, the indigent defense had a net income before the transfer from the general fund. But that was only 149,000, but essentially they didn't need any help from the general fund and we gave them 150 grand.
And that one's a
That's
little
by
different
statute,
because
though.
by
But
statute.
yeah, so that's what I was wondering with the probate too. I didn't know how much.
Probate's different. Childcare
Is there-
and probate, they're different than that.
Okay.
Karen, do you have
You're
anything to
making a
add?
good point.
I'm so proud of where this county has come in this a year to be able to not have negative cash, not have a negative fund balance. In all my years here, I've never seen such a great improvement, and I'm really proud of all of us for the hard work that's gone into this and really making a difference in our county and financial stability. Good job, everyone.
Kirk, do you have anything to add to this? Thanks, Nathan. I'm sure we will, anybody's got any questions?
Yeah, feel free to reach out and obviously I'll be over in West Branch again next week, so I'll have the bound. And we can get to Karen or Tim and.
Tim, did you have anything to add? I'm sorry.
I don't,
All right.
no offense, Nathan, I'm just glad it's done.
I'm with you.
Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
5, discussion items, appointments to Wellvance Board of Directors.
Been talking about this off and on the last 3 months, but Commissioners Wiltsey and Serbrook have seats on the Wellvance Board of Directors. Those terms expire at the end of the month. And unless there's objection, I'll prepare the resolution to reappoint them to the 3-year term beginning April 1.
Please.
No objections.
Please do.
Commissioner Scott?
Wasn't there another position in question?
Well,
Commissioner
there's
Wiltie filled it.
No, the private citizen one. No,
no,
that's been filled?
right.
Okay,
And you'll have, next 2 years, you'll fill one each of those years. And
okay,
then the 2 will come up again.
okay.
Commissioner Wiltie, do you have anything?
I was in Tawas a couple mornings ago and met the executive assistant to the CEO at Wellvance and got my iPad and got a bunch of information and a picture taken and I'm really excited to work with Commissioner Serbrook and the 3 counties. It's a really important topic and I'm looking forward to it.
Earned sick leave policy?
Okay, you've got the latest version of the draft, and this is one that needs to be on next week because the effective date is actually 2 days before the meeting, so we'll have to get the horse. Things to walk through with you, though, that I've highlighted in yellow are somewhat discretionary. What you're seeing in this draft is, in effect, the baseline that's required by the statute. Now, use of the sick time, in this draft, we're saying employees hired after February 21 may not begin using their accrued sick time until 120 days after commencing their employment with the employer. This is the probationary period. We have been, in effect, allowing employees to use this once it's earned, at least in the contracts that we bargained. We have to, we can't go any longer than the 120 calendar days. So the question here is, do we want to be consistent and just simply allow it to be used once it's earned? Do you want the probationary period? Now, what's your pleasure? And I'll make sure this gets amended to incorporate what you decide.
Questions? Commissioner Wiltie?
I don't really have any questions. This is something I've been working on with a lot of stuff and just not good for a lot of our businesses here in the county, and it is what it is, but move forward.
Commissioner Scott?
How does this play in with our unions?
Right now, for most of the earned time off, we're not requiring a probationary period to use it. Now, that's not to say that's true with everything on the personal days. I think in some of the contracts, we still require 90 days before you can use a personal day. But things like the sick days, they're accumulated on a different formula than what this statute requires, but a certain number of hours are earned each pay period. I'd like to break it out by the month so we can see just exactly how these accruals will work. So what this language does is requires the 120 days, so roughly 4 months of employment before you're allowed to use a sick day. What we've been doing with our contracts is saying for sick days, that's not required. If you are here for a month and you need to use a sick day for, whatever, you're allowed to use it. You've accrued it. We're allowing you to use it. Part of my thinking too is, some of these banks get built up high enough. We don't need to be putting an artificial limit on it that you have to have, so many hours before we'll allow you to use them. But, it's 6 of one, half dozen, and either way will work.
Now, this one here now has a maximum of 72 hours.
Well, that's the next topic.
Oh, okay.
Right now, it's just when you can start using those sick days.
I think it should stay with use it once they earn it. You never know what's gonna happen. I mean, if you've earned it, even though you haven't been there 120 days, they should be able to use it. Hopefully they don't, but if you need it, you need it. Commissioner Mayo? Oh,
Oh, yeah.
I believe that.
Commissioner Serbrook?
I agree. I think it should mirror what we've got in the union contracts. So everybody's on the same level. And I agree, if you're a new hire and you need to take a sick day a month into work, you should be able to use it.
Okay, next.
The next one is the maximum accrual. Under this program, the maximum is listed at 72 hours and allowed to be 15-minute increments. The 15-minute increment is consistent with across the board. Everybody, we're allowing that now. So it's the maximum accrual. And remember, this is just sick days and it's primarily our part-timers. We've already got our full-timers on a schedule already that it's in compliance. So the suggestion, this is again, the minimum or maximum, I guess, maximum minimum, I guess, in the statute. I don't suggest you need to do anything with it, but it's your call.
Commissioner Wiltie?
I mean, I think for what they're stating, for the amount of employees we have, 72 hours is what we have to offer. I think that's what we have to do.
Commissioner Scott?
No, by a union contract allowing more than the maximum, are we violating the statute?
No, because this is the minimum max, I guess, for lack of another word. What they're saying is that you got to meet the minimum requirement of the statute, you've got to allow the 72 hours. So if you want that to be
Go over it,
250 hours, you could do that. You
right,
can't do
you
10.
just can't go less than 72.
Can't go less.
All right. Well, the contract's being in place then. Yeah, that's fine. 72 is fine with me. We don't need to get into bigger banks than that.
Commissioner Mayhew?
That's what they want.
Commissioner Serbrook?
I agree, 72.
Okay, next.
Next is number 4, the sick time carryover. What is written here is that earned but unused sick leave may be carried over from 1 year to the next, limited to 72 hours. So again, that established max no matter what. For purposes of this policy, the year would run October 1 to September 30th. Now, I put that in there because that's concurrent with our fiscal year. Just makes sense that we be consistent across the board. But we're also saying at the end of the year on September 30th, when we go to October 1, you don't lose necessarily what you've accrued. You can continue that, but your maximum will always be 72 hours. So if you have 25 hours, you don't lose the 25, you continue to accrue. If you have 72 hours at September 30th, you're not getting any higher than 72.
Commissioner Wiltie?
Yeah, that's max 72.
Commissioner Scott?
I agree.
Commissioner Mayhew?
Yeah.
I
Commissioner Serbrook?
agree.
Okay, next.
On page 3, number 7, unused sick time. Payment will not be made for unused sick leave time upon an employee's separation from employment with the employer for any reason. That's what's in here. That's allowed in the statute. We do allow right now for our employees to, the only ones that have sick anymore, well, there are a few of them that still do. I think we allow a 50% payout upon separation. So if you want to be consistent with the union contracts, that's here. The statute's not requiring you to do that. The statute says you don't have to pay anything out. But if we're going to be consistent across the board, it would be that 50% upon separation from employment. And I think we also add to that in the union contracts, separation, but voluntary, not involuntary. So if somebody's been discharged for cause, we don't pay it out. All right. But we don't typically have that happen. It's usually people moving on to other jobs.
I think it should stay with the contract that they 50% if they, that's what my opinion. Commissioner Scott?
Yeah. All right. Yes.
Commissioner Wiltie?
Yes.
Commissioner Mayhew?
Is this for just the union or
This is-
everybody?
This is non-union, primarily part-timers.
Time.
Okay.
Everybody
That
else.
will.
And that will, yes.
Commissioner
I
Serbrook?
agree.
Okay. Anything else with that?
Those are the 4 points I needed clarification, so we'll put that on for next week.
Item C, proposal for fiscal year 2024 and 2025 cost allocation plan.
Okay, every year through a cost allocation plan that is required for reimbursement or, payment, it's reimbursement for certain expenses. So primarily the courts in the reimbursement formulas that are used. Also, I think it's the Crime Victim Advocate grant that we receive also requires these calculations, and some other grants periodically require that we go through an exercise that determines how much of everybody's time goes into whatever grant or project we're working on. So for instance, with the child care fund, we know part of the treasurer's time is used to account for funds that are brought into the child care fund. Friend of the court fund is the same way. We don't have a separate finance division in the courts. This is something that the treasurer's office takes care of. So what happens here is that our vendor goes through each department or each function of the county and determines what percentage of that person's time or that department's time is dedicated to this purpose. And again, that's the documentation the state needs for their accounting purposes. This really isn't discretionary. We need to do it. We've been using Maximus for a number of years. What they've done here is proposed, 2 more years doing this, but at no additional cost. So the same price that we've paid. I would also note that it's a little confusing when you read this because when we're doing for fiscal year 25, for instance, we're actually looking at audit for fiscal year 23. So there's a little bit of a lag in there. Don't get confused by that. It's just how that works. But this will be in effect a continuation of what we've been doing for a number of years. It's met the standard that the state requires.
Questions, comments? Commissioners? We need to do it, so.
Do it.
Okay,
No increase in cost, do it.
This is basically the contract for 23 and in there it says
2
2 1-year extensions.
Right.
That's what we're taking care of. Yeah, I heard about Maximus the first year I was here. Yeah, it's one of those state things.
7,000.
Yeah, $7,000.
Okay, item D, broadband project letters of support. Tim?
Okay, this started with one request for letter of support that was on the agenda last week from Presque Isle Electric and Gas Co-op. And since then, we've received similar requests from an organization called Brightspeed and one called Cherry Capital Connection. What they're asking for is a letter of support for their application for what's called a BEAD grant. And if you want more information, Penny is here and can probably, another hour or so, you could talk to us about that, about what it's all about. We did have a meeting this afternoon at 1:30 with the Cherry Capital Connection Group in particular. And one of the questions I asked, and I think the answer was to the affirmative, there's no downside to the county sending a letter of support for all 3 of these. We're not so fine-tuned right now that we even know what areas that these groups are going to serve. Now, Cherry Capital is in Edwards Township right now. But aside from that, I don't know where Brightspeed is. I don't know where Presque Isle is in the county, or even if they are in the county right now, they may be speculating that, well, if we get this grant, we'll expand our service area into Ogemaw. Well, if they do, wonderful. That means broadband's coming to Ogemaw. And as far as, at least where I sit, it really doesn't matter who's bringing it. We need it. So at this stage, I think it would be appropriate to simply have the board authorize the chair to sign a letter on behalf of the board for all 3 of these. Now, there was a comment made this afternoon about getting a separate letter of support from each individual commissioner. Well, that's not how we operate. The board speaks as one, speaks through its motions. The chair signs the letters officially on behalf of the board. If they want 5 copies of that letter, we can certainly run 5 copies, but in effect, it would say the same thing. Also, the letter I draft, and if you're agreeable to do this, it'll be on your agenda for next week for consideration. I rarely take the templates that the vendors are offering and just simply saying sign this, and the primary content of it will be there. But I will cross-check to make sure it's consistent with our policies and we're not inadvertently committing ourselves to something we don't intend to do. So it'll probably be worded differently, but it'll likely be worded the same for each group that you offer a letter to. And I'll probably ask you just to do a general resolution that as these come in, that you're authorizing the chair to sign. We may get 2 or 3 more of these between now and the time their deadline comes of, I think it's April 4th, they
April
told us
9th.
today. So there's no reason to do a resolution every time you have one of these. You know, if it's a bead grant, it's serving Ogemaw County, good enough, the chair is authorized to sign.
Penny, do you have anything you want to add? Thanks for coming.
No, thank you. I just had a question for Tim. So Phil is thinking about doing a letter as well. Are you good with that?
Yeah, because he's representing EDC or even MSU Extension. I don't know if they would do that or not, but that's fine.
Okay.
What they want is the official governing body, the municipality. In the county's case, that's the Board of Commissioners. They mentioned they might go to the townships and to the cities as well. Well, you know, good for them, but you know, we're the county and that's where we're concerned.
Yeah, things are changing constantly. When we initially got word on the grant, we were told that it was not going to be closed out until every township, every area that was not covered, until it was proven that they were going to be covered under one of these companies, it wasn't going to be approved. Well, now they've said, okay, if you're not covered in this one, we'll cover you next time. So I think by being able to do that across the board, we stand a better chance of getting covered. But and it's going to take multiple providers. So.
That's good news. This is good news.
Yeah, Cherry Capital is only so far talking about Edmonds. We don't know what the other ones are doing, but by talking with Cherry Capital, they said, okay, so then round 2, what you're not covered, we can talk about that. So.
Mr. Wiltie, do you want to piggyback to this?
Yeah, so you guys heard me talk about the broadband with the EDC. I was on that call today with Cherry Capital. And yeah, I mean, the universal support on this is huge. It was also really interesting. We found out some really interesting information today. So right now there's 20 companies in the states that are approved for this BEAD program, which the first one is April 9th, and then there's going to be a couple more after that. But about 50% of the companies right now have an open access. So that makes it as, say, Cherry Capital is an open access company. Another fiber company comes in, that they can work together and use each other's fiber to be able to continue to, you know, get these areas of the county that we really need. So, yeah, no, this is good. You know, the sad part is this was here a couple years ago. The money was there. A contractor, you know, took up a bunch of the areas and was not able to succeed on doing anything, and that money was given back. So we really you know, we're years behind when that, you know, was there years ago for us to happen. So hopefully, you know, a lot of people learn from that, and hopefully this time we'll be able to really see some work get done in the county.
Good news. Commissioner Scott, anything? I don't have a problem with it. I guess do you have a letter of support? Obviously, you're in favor of it.
Oh, absolutely.
Commissioner Scott.
Well, that first one there, Presque Isle, I didn't see anything that was directly affecting us. They talk about a number of different things there, but I know where Presque Isle is. I think they're just fishing for us to push for them. I didn't see anything where Brightspeed, that was a different story. At least they're explaining, tapping off this. And then news to me with Cherry Capital that they're already here and they're already talking with Edwards, and that's great. Because if it's touching us, if they're really wanting to provide something for us, then I'm all for it. But that's where I'm at.
Commissioner Mayhew.
Okay, but I knew kind of not in the computers.
Commissioner Serbrook.
I think we should do a blanket one even for Presque Isle. I was just gonna look at their coverage area, so. I am one of their customers, but not in Ogemaw County, so.
Oh, yeah, I'm north, you would be.
I don't know if they touch into Ogemaw or not.
One more comment.
They do Oscoda County, so. Alcona, Alpena, Sheboygan, Emmett, Mackinac, Montmorency, Oscoda, Otsego, and Presque Isle. So they are in Oscoda County, so maybe they have plans for possibly.
Expanding.
I don't know.
Commissioner Wiltie.
even the contractor we spoke today, I mean, these are his competitors, but he was very adamant, the fact that we should support anyone that's coming in to look for some. From us.
Okay, Commissioner comments, Commissioner Serbrook,
Have any?
Commissioner Mayhew,
Nope.
Commissioner Scott.
Well, just to reiterate on this audit and the reason that I was asking him about progress through the years and everything else. These changes happened from 2020 on. Or 21, really 21 on. And that's when we brought an administrator into the county. That's what I believe has made all the difference in the world. I mean, we were putting nothing was going to happen overnight. And the same thing we hear on the news right now is all these changes don't happen in the first week like they were promised. They say these changes all had to turn around the whole economic wave that was going on for 20 years prior. I mean, back a few years ago, and I think you remember when Bev Scott and Maggie Robinson was here in the front row and told us about how the tax revolving fund was even made back in the 70s and how it started out with just hundreds of dollars and then went on up. And they warned us then, you know, don't keep depleting it, you know. Well, I think the biggest thing is we brought in an administrator that had the background and was able to put us on course, give us the information to make the tough decisions, and it's just been a repeated thing. And that's why I say these savings over year are gonna compound and they'll make up the difference. The savings will make up the difference of any revenue. Because the problem we've had, I've said it all along, is it is not a revenue problem. It's been a spending problem. And we had to get the spending under control in order to fix it. You're just not gonna make that much money more. ARPA did, but it was a Band-Aid for the time that we can make the transition happen with less pain in it.
I think on top of that, there's been new ways in the last 4 years of doing things. We have new department heads that have done, that are doing things differently for the better, I believe. A lot of things transitioned 4 years ago. A lot of very important departments got brand new department heads and deputy clerks. And I mean, there's been multiple changes, obviously, that have been very positive. Bringing new people in is refreshing and obviously has been positive. So good job, guys. Commissioner Wiltie.
Yeah, this is, I've been looking forward to this audit for a long time. It's really exciting. I mean, obviously, we know we've got a long ways to go, but it's very refreshing to see. It's great to see at our budget meetings, to see the people that are sitting at the table and the passion that they have and the determination that they have to see this county get in the right direction. And we're heading that way, but bottom line is we got a long ways to go. As I always say, we got to keep the throttle on the gas. We got to keep making smart decisions. We got to run a level of government that we can afford. I think we, for years and years, had a level that we couldn't afford. I've said that many times. And now we're realizing what we can afford, and now we just need to be the best, absolute best we can at what we have. So we got a lot of great people. I'm really looking forward to the future. And I'm excited that we have this next 4 years ahead of us to work together, and we need to stay united. We're not going to always agree with everything, but at the end of the day, I think we all have the same goals in mind. And again, with the great people that we have here, we stay united. You know, we're going to continue to get where we need to be.
Public, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I know we had that discussion. I've had a ton of meetings here this last week. Are we waiting for those? Like we had our transit today, and we're just going to do that then not on these.
I know it was brought up. And this is just my opinion. I know it was kind of brought up casually, and we had a lot of other things that we were talking about at the time. I prefer it personally, I prefer it general meetings. You are very active, I agree with that statement. Because I think this is more of a roundtable discussion, and we're typically at these meetings longer than a general meeting that's typically about half the amount of time. So I prefer our actual reports from meetings to be during our actual meetings. I think that this is more for like a roundtable type of discussion, but that's my own personal opinion. So it's whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I just wanna, I don't wanna step on any toes. I know that one time Mark was kind of surprised by it. I'm,
Well, I was, like I said, I was just looking for direction.
Yeah.
Well,
Time.
it changed from the time that we didn't even have comments before.
Right.
When you were here in the last.
No, you had added it, and I understood your direction there is if any roundtable discussion has happened, and at the end of the meeting, if commissioners want to maybe say something that wasn't said, or something pops to their mind, this is kind of more of like a roundtable versus a professional setting,
Well, I
so,
do have a comment.
I'm not done yet.
oh, go ahead, Commissioner, sir.
I had just stated that because again, the amount of things I have, but I can just keep good notes and then now moving forward, I'll just know that on those nights is when you guys just need to be prepared for maybe some long-winded Charlie talks.
Anything else?
I am not gonna be here next week because of surgery. You had something,
That's the following week, I was wrong.
oh, it's the following week?
Yeah, I'll be done.
Okay, so I won't be here.
I'm gonna be in Florida next week. I don't think I'll be back
What time when are you leaving?
to Florida.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, next week? I
Next week.
apologize. I'm not leaving till after the meeting. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I won't be here then. I can do my claims duty next week, but it's the end of March and I'll be done. So somebody else's turn is coming up.
I think that's me.
Okay,
Me and-
and
I
Mark
think-
and I will be done. The end of March, it'll be the first quarter.
Okay, well, best of luck on your surgery.
Thank you.
I hope you have a good outcome. If you need anything, please feel free to reach out
Okay.
to one of us.
Okay. Okay.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Oh, no, public comment.
Oh, crap. Whoops.
Oh, crap.
Any public comment? Our gentleman left. He must have,
Down.
sorry. Nothing. Any public comment on the phone? I'm sorry. Apologize for that.
Any relation or anything?
I have lots of relations.
I'm telling you, every month.
Every-
I tell you, every meeting, it's getting more and more.
Relation?
Yeah.
No public comment on the phone? I apologize. Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Meeting adjourned.
Well,
Good night, everyone.
Doris and, you know, I'm gonna make-